Welcome to this explainer on what is absolutely, without a doubt, one of psychology's most famous and fiercely debated studies of all time. We're going to be looking at a story that has literally shaped textbooks, movies, and our fundamental understanding of human nature. But, as you'll see today, the story we've all been told, well, it isn't exactly the whole truth.
So let's dive right into this chilling question that's honestly haunted our understanding of human nature for half a century. What happens when you give ordinary people absolute power? I mean, do good people automatically turn bad in a toxic environment? Are we all just one uniform away from becoming monsters?
To figure that out, we have to go back to August 1971. In this absolutely legendary experiment, psychologist Philip Zimbardo and his team completely transformed the basement of Stanford's psychology building into a mock jail. They recruited 24 ordinary, healthy male college students, flipped a coin, and just arbitrarily assigned them to be either guards or prisoners. And they went all in. The prisoners were physically arrested by real local police, stripped, deloused, given these numbered smocks, and actually had heavy chains bolted to their ankles. Meanwhile, the guards, they were handed khaki uniforms, billy clubs, and those silver-reflecting sunglasses, just to completely hide their eyes.
Part 1. The Legend of Stanford, A Descent into Brutality.
And the descent into chaos here was terrifyingly rapid. Sunday kicked off with the shock of those mass police arrests. By Tuesday, literally just 2 days in, the prisoners had barricaded themselves in their cells, sparking this massive rebellion that the guards actually crushed with fire extinguishers. By Thursday, the guards' boredom drove them to invent these degrading, sexually humiliating rituals for the prisoners. And then finally on Friday, the whole study was prematurely terminated. Why? Well, Zimbardo's colleague, Christina Maslach, who he was actually dating at the time, visited the basement, saw the horrifying dehumanization, and heroically challenged him to shut the whole thing down.
Zimbardo summarized the terrifying takeaway like this. He said, "You start off as an actor, playing a role, and after a while, you become the role." And this birthed his famous bad barrel theory. The whole idea here is that systemic, situational forces naturally and inevitably corrupt ordinary people. So it wasn't that the guards were bad apples, right? It was that the prison was a bad barrel. Put anyone, literally anyone, in that position of power, the theory goes, and they are going to naturally conform to the cruelty of the role.
For decades, this dark narrative became unquestioned psychological gospel. It was taught in basically every introductory psychology class as the ultimate cautionary tale, and its real-world impact was absolutely massive. Zimbardo even used this exact argument to defend soldiers accused of horrible abuses at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, and to defend a young bank robber named Alex Blum. He argued that extreme situational forces just totally overpowered their individual morals. The science was settled. We were all just helpless victims of our environments. Or so we thought.
Part 2. The Unraveling, Uncovering the Hidden Truth.
Because in 2018, the story really began to fracture. A writer named Ben Blum, who, surprisingly enough, actually happened to be the cousin of that bank robber Zimbardo defended, published a massive investigative exposé titled The Lifespan of a Lie. By digging into newly released Stanford archives and interviewing the original participants, Blum unearthed these hidden details that sparked a massive self-reckoning across the entire field of psychology.
And the archival audio unearthed by Blum completely shattered the illusion. See, Zimbardo had always maintained that the guards' behavior was purely organic, that they received absolutely no instructions on how to act. But recordings of Zimbardo's student, Warden, proved otherwise. The warden explicitly instructed a reluctant guard to be a tough guard, telling him, "You have to kind of try and get it in you." This completely shatters the myth of natural blind conformity. The cruelty wasn't an accident, you guys, it was a directive.
And then there was the iconic mental breakdown of prisoner number 8612. If you've seen the documentary footage, his screaming, uncontrollable rage is absolutely terrifying. It was presented as the ultimate proof of the prison's psychological toll. But decades later, the prisoner admitted a shocking truth. He was faking it. Yeah, he just wanted to be released from the experiment so he could go home and study for his grad school exams.
Now, naturally, these revelations caused an absolute uproar. But it's really important we look impartially at Zimbardo's response. He mounted a fierce defense, arguing that critics were just cherry-picking details. He maintained that regardless of the newly surfaced audio or those participant confessions, the core message remains vital. For Zimbardo, the verifiable evidence still clearly demonstrates that systemic and situational forces operate powerfully to influence our behavior, often entirely without our personal awareness.
Part 3. The BBC Prison Study, A Replication Failure.
Let's fast forward a bit and look at what happened in 2002 when researchers Alex Haslam and Stephen Reicher attempted to run a similar experiment for the BBC. The results were a staggering contrast to Stanford. The guards did not naturally conform to their roles. In fact, they were deeply uncomfortable with their power. And the prisoners? Well, because the guards were so hesitant, the prisoners realized they had the numbers and actually united to overthrow the guards.
The specific outcomes of this BBC study are just absolutely fascinating. So the prisoners formed a self-governing commune great after the breakout, but here is where human nature really gets interesting. The commune eventually collapsed under its own internal tensions. And following that collapse, a new group of participants conspired to install a much harsher authoritarian regime. They actively chose tyranny because they felt it would solve their group's problems. This proved something profound. Tyranny isn't blind conformity. It is a conscious, active group choice.
Part 4. The Reality, a New Psychological Consensus.
So the crucial point to understand here is this new theory developed by Haslam and Reicher called identity leadership. They argue that Zimbardo didn't just passively observe the guards. He acted as an active leader. He created a shared group identity among the guards and essentially licensed their abuse for the sake of science. People do not just blindly adopt social roles and mistreat others. They do it when they share a group identity and believe they are serving a social purpose or working toward a leader's noble vision.
The shift in psychology here is just massive. The old myth told us we were helpless victims of the bad barrel, passive conformists to whatever role we were handed. But the new reality tells us we are active participants in toxic leadership. Modern psychology largely rejects the idea that we are completely helpless victims of our environments. Doing bad things actually requires our buy-in.
Now, despite all these bitter academic wars, there was a moment of incredible professional grace. In 2018, Philip Zimbardo and his co-researcher Craig Haney actually came together with their biggest critics, Alex Haslam and Stephen Reicher, to sign an official consensus statement. It was an historic truce, laying down common ground for the future of psychology.
If we distill their joint statement down, 4 key agreements emerge. First, they admitted that both the Stanford and the BBC studies are demonstration studies with methodological limitations rather than strict, controlled scientific experiments. Second, explanations for toxic behavior are multifactorial. You can't just blame a single role. Third, they welcomed open science and debate. But fourth, and absolutely most importantly, they agreed that regardless of the flaws in how it was measured, studying the origins of human brutality remains incredibly critical work.
So, what should you really take away from this explainer? Why does this matter to you and me today? Well, it matters because the bad barrel theory was honestly almost too comforting. It told us if ordinary people do terrible things, we can't really blame them because they can't help it. But the real truth we've uncovered is that systems of power require our active consent and our shared belief. We are not absolved of our sins by the fragile nature of the human psyche, and that means you have the power and the agency to resist.
I'll leave you with this lingering thought on the dark depths of human nature. If we aren't helplessly and inevitably corrupted by power, if we aren't just actors blindly falling into a role, what truly drives ordinary people to cross the line? How susceptible are you to a toxic leader with a compelling vision? It's a question definitely worth asking yourself. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what you think you know.